Hey everyone, welcome back to Romeo and Juliet. Today we're going to dive straight into Act 3, no time to waste now. Recall at the end of Act 2, what happens is Romeo and Juliet fall in love. They finally get married by the hands of Friar Lawrence, who is this kind of horticulturalist. He's a botanist, he grows plants, but also he's kind of a pastor at the same time, okay? And he decides to marry Romeo and Juliet under his blessing because he thinks it'll finally end this warring clash between the Capulet and the Montague family. Now, Act 3 is the kind of classic mid-act, mid-play, massive twist that is characteristic of a lot of Shakespeare's tragedies. So Act 3 really puts a dagger in so far a play that has not that much conflict, okay? So far, the only real tension or the only real stress within the play is the fact that Romeo and Juliet are in love, even though their families basically won't approve of their love. That's not such a big deal, right? Well, Act 3, Scene 1 changes everything because it introduces a new degree of violence and slaughter that we've never seen before at this point in the particular play. So let's get straight into it. What happens, as what happens in the start of a lot of scenes, Benvolio and Mercutio are sitting around, basically somewhere in Verona, having a little bit of a joke, but they're not so lighthearted right now. They're a little bit afraid the Capulets are going to show up and start a fight, and Mercutio basically says, and Benvolio basically says, I don't really have the strength. I don't really have the effort. I really just want to leave. Like, let's just go. I don't want to have to get into a brawl, especially because, as Mercutio suggests at around line 15, the quarrels as of recent have become increasingly more vicious and violent, and he's afraid that someone might actually kill someone else. Well, speak of the devil, at about line 30 on the second page, Tybalt shows up, who's one of the more aggressive members of the Capulet family. Remember, Tybalt wanted to kill Romeo at the party when he realized it was Romeo, and the Capulet patriarch basically said, don't do that, that's a bit stupid, okay, we don't want to scare off our guests and ruin our reputation for killing people at our parties. But Tybalt shows up, and basically Mercutio and Benvolio, they begin jeering at Tybalt, they begin provoking him with all sorts of insults and names, and then Romeo turns up. Now, it is a little bit of dramatic irony for us as an audience because we know the type of situation that Romeo is in, whereas no one else or none of the other characters really do, okay? So Benvolio, Mercutio, Tybalt, they don't know that Romeo has been married to a Capulet, okay? So Romeo is in a very difficult position where he comes in and he tries to stop the fight, and that confuses both sides, okay? Doesn't only confuse his own family, it also confuses the Capulets, because the Capulets are thinking, or Tybalt is thinking, this makes no sense, right? You've hurt me so much before. He says, boy, this shall not excuse the injuries that thou hast done me, therefore turn and draw. Okay, Tybalt says, I'm not going to take your random excuses now. I'm not going to take your, let's not fight anymore. That's a load of BS. That's what he says, okay? He says, look, you've done me so much wrong in the past. Come, draw your sword and fight me. And Romeo says, I don't want to fight you, okay? And he actually says this line, which causes rage in his own family. He says, and so, good Capulet, which name I tender as dearly as mine own, be satisfied. Now, obviously, Romeo is saying this because he is in love with Juliet. Juliet is a Capulet, which means he kind of has to show some degree of affection or allegiance to the Capulets, because otherwise he's married a Capulet, but then he kind of puts down basically what is his own family name. So he's in a very difficult position at this point, okay? And Mercutio and Benvolio basically take this as a slight against their own family. They say, oh, calm, dishonorable, vile submission, okay? They think Romeo is basically throwing up the white flag and giving it up. Okay, they think Romeo, who's been carrying on this fight against the Capulets for so many years, has suddenly become weak, okay? So, for example, Mercutio says, good king of cats, nothing but one of your 9 lives that I mean to make bold withal. Basically, they just disregard Romeo's attempt to stop the fight. They just keep jeering at each other, and they come to such a great disagreement that they draw swords and try to kill each other. What happens? Romeo gets between the two. He stands in between, and what that allows Tybalt to do is to poke his knife under the arm of Romeo and kill Mercutio while he's defenseless. Okay, Mercutio falls under the arm of Romeo. And here's one of the most famous lines in the play and one of the most famous sentiments as well. Mercutio, as he's lying, basically dying by the strike of Tybalt. Mercutio being a very, very good friend of Romeo's, okay, someone who's been by his side throughout the entire play, says, "A plague are both houses. I am sped, is he gone and have nothing." Okay, he says, "A plague upon both your houses." Okay, he curses the Capulets, who are his enemies, but he also curses the Montagues. He curses Romeo for allowing him to die. He curses Romeo for stepping in between them. He no longer has any allegiance in his dying words to any particular family. He says, "A curse on both your houses, a plague on both your houses. Why the devil came you between us? I was hurt under your arm." Now, obviously, this makes Romeo feel extremely angry. He's not angry at Mercutio for expressing, a plague on Montagues. He's angry at Tybalt for being such a murderous villain that he would strike and kill Mercutio even as Romeo is trying to stop the fight. So Romeo at this point, once again, bringing back this idea of gender roles, which is going to become a very important part of this particular act. He says, "Thy beauty hath made me effeminate, O sweet Juliet, and in my temper softened valor's steel." He becomes fired up after the death of his friend, who he feels is completely unjustified, that he seeks out Tybalt and tries to kill him. Now, this is a very controversial thing for Romeo to be doing. Why? Because Tybalt is Juliet's cousin. Okay, Tybalt is someone who is very intimate and very close to Juliet as a person of her most immediate family. Okay, and Romeo is now seeking to kill Juliet's cousin. So this is a very, very strange set of circumstances that are very conflicting and contradictory, as I previously suggested a big theme of the play is about. Okay, so Romeo and Tybalt fight. Tybalt falls. What happens is suddenly the official executive police officers of Verona show up. They say, "What's happened?" Okay, Benvolio, Lady Capulet's here, all these people are here. Benvolio basically tells the police officers, "Look, Romeo was fighting in revenge, okay? Tybalt killed my friend Mercutio, and Romeo fought in revenge. But even then, the Prince of Verona doesn't really take this as an excuse. He says, well, we can't really allow him to kill someone and remain in our city, right? So basically, Romeo slew him, he slew Mercutio, who now the price of his dear blood doth owe." Okay? He says, well, we can't really allow Romeo to get away with this, right? He's taken a life, yeah? And Tybalt has taken a life and he's been punished for it, but Romeo has also taken a life. So he, who should pay the price? Who should pay the penalty? And the prince says, well, we can't allow him to basically get away with it scot-free. He must be banished. Okay, he says, "I will be deaf to pleading and excuses, nor tears nor prayers shall purchase out abuses." Okay, he says, I don't care how grieving you are that I'm banishing Romeo, okay? Abuse of the law, murder is not going to be taken away by tears, okay? "Let Romeo hence in haste, else when he is found, that hour is his last. Bear hence this body, and attend our will. Mercy but murders, pardoning those that kill." Okay, he's saying, if I see Romeo again, I am going to execute him. Tell him that he needs to get out of here as soon as he can. I don't want to see him in the city again. Mercy but murders, pardoning those who kill. He says, we cannot be a city that's run under a kind of moral landscape where people can kill and not be punished for it. Act 3, Scene 2, Juliet opens with a long monologue, which is a little bit foreshadowing, a little bit sad about how she longs for Romeo to come during the night, okay? They can't really meet during the day, right? Because that would be way too suspicious. Someone might find out and then they might call off the entire relationship. So she's longing for this, and it's almost a really quite heavily sexual undertone to this, okay? Can't wait for Romeo to come over and, enter with her in the bedroom, okay? So basically, there's this long monologue where she's expressing her love. She makes all sorts of different references, but unfortunately, this is completely spoiled by the sudden entry of the nurse, who is obviously extremely distraught, and she's extremely upset. Juliet says, what's the problem? What's the problem? Okay? immediately Juliet actually turns first to think of Romeo. That's how infatuated and in love with Romeo she is. When the nurse comes in bursting crying, she thinks, oh no, Romeo has committed suicide or something. Romeo has gotten into trouble. But what's actually happened is Tybalt has died, her cousin, okay? Now, once again, this enters almost a fourth or fifth layer of complexity to the level of internal contradiction and paradox that's present in Romeo and Juliet. Why? Because not only has Romeo and Juliet fallen in love, even though they shouldn't, and not only, like for example, Friar Lawrence's level of complexity or contradiction, and not only is love itself a little bit contradictory and hard to predict, all these things, are combining, layering, conflicting with each other. But now what's happened is Romeo, Juliet's husband, has killed her cousin. How is she meant to reconcile that? Okay, her immediate reaction is one of anger. She says, "O serpent heart, hid with a flowering face, did ever dragon keep so fair a cave? Beautiful tyrant, fiend angelical, dove-feathered raven, wolvish ravening lamb." Okay, she says, well, she immediately has this burst of outrage at Romeo. There's a kind of, once again, an appearance of a common theme in Shakespeare's plays of appearance and reality. The stark contrast between what someone might look like and what someone is actually like under the surface. And she says, well, Romeo is like a serpent heart hid with a flowering face, a wolf in sheep's clothing. She has that initial reaction, okay, but then as she begins to understand the situation where, she understands that Tybalt was trying to take Romeo's life, she once again reestablishes her love for Romeo as being more important in this particular situation. And to the point where she basically even starts cursing. She starts cursing her own family. She says that villain, who's basically like, Tybalt, her cousin, that villain who tried to kill Romeo, I'd rather, Romeo not be banished and not be punished for his murder of Tybalt than 10,000 Tybalts die. She said, that one word banished hath slain 10,000 Tybalts. Tybalt's death was woe enough, it have ended there. Oh, if sour woe delights in fellowship, and needly will be ranked with other griefs. Okay, so what she's saying is this, Romeo being banished is suddenly, almost a cathartic, terror for her. Okay, because what happens is they've just gotten married, they've just fallen in love, and suddenly Romeo has been banished just because he was challenged to a fight to the death, okay, by her cousin Tybalt. And she says, I would rather 10,000 Tybalts die than Romeo to be banished. That's how deep her love is. Act 3, Scene 3, Romeo at this point doesn't actually know either, okay? So, funnily enough, both Romeo and Juliet find out about this banishment through other characters, okay? Through messengers. And the whole, problem with messengers and the problem of other minds is going to become a lot clearer in Act 4 and Act 5 when conflicts between messengers actually happen. That causes a lot of the tragedy in the play. But Act 3, Scene 3, okay, what happens is Romeo goes to Friar Lawrence's place, okay, and more or less what happens is Friar Lawrence reveals to him the prince's decree that Romeo will be banished or else he'll be slaughtered, okay? Romeo has such an extremely negative reaction. He says, banishment, be merciful, say death, for exile hath more terror in his look much more than death. He says, I would rather be dead than be exiled from Verona because obviously Juliet is here, my love, okay? It's so much more painful to be alive and be away from someone than it is just to be dead and completely unfeeling. He even expresses the sentiment like, heaven is here where Juliet lives. This is around line 30. Okay, there's all this sort of flowery language. On the white wonder of dear Juliet's hand, and steal a mortal blessing from her lips, who even in pure and vestal modesty still blush, as thinking their own kisses sin. But Romeo may not, he is banished, okay? He's very, very self-pitying, okay? He's really, really sad for himself, which is obviously a kind of almost, not humorous, but awkward and cringe-worthy experience for the audience, because he's so incredibly sad over himself. Okay, Friar Lawrence is trying to calm him down. Friar Lawrence is like, listen to me. This is not as bad as you think. Please listen to me. But Romeo keeps chastising himself. He almost basically tries to make himself more and more upset, okay? This is made even worse when the nurse comes in and informs Romeo that Juliet is crying all the time as well. You know, Romeo is collapsing on the ground, he's weeping, he's sobbing. He has such brutal and punishing words for himself. Friar Lawrence, okay, at one point, around line 110, has had enough. He's fed up, okay? He says, hold thy desperate hand. Why? Because Romeo is about to stab himself. He's all rolling around on the ground. He's so desperate and he's about to kill himself. And Friar Lawrence says, hold your desperate hand. Art thou a man? Thy form cries out, thou art. Thy tears are womanish. Thy wild acts denote the unreasonable fury of a beast. So once again, this brings back that idea of kind of, which is, you know, a concept that's been a little bit criticized in modern day. We don't obviously subscribe to this idea anymore, but that the genders have a kind of essentiality to them, okay? So if you're a woman, you ought to behave a certain way, you ought to have a certain set of emotions or reactions or ways of viewing the world, okay? So for example, you know, to Friar Lawrence, okay, men should be stable, they should be strong, they should be courageous, they shouldn't have these womanish tears, okay? And Romeo is kind of, in the eyes of probably a lot of English society at the time, and as well as to Friar Lawrence, who represents that voice of reason of English society, he probably seems a little bit effeminate because he's so emotional, okay? He's so desperate over himself. He's so desperate over things that he can't change, okay? And Friar Lawrence even brings out this idea of unchangeability. He says, you know, why railst thou on thy birth, the heaven and earth? Since birth and heaven and earth, all three do meet in thee at once, which thou at once wouldst lose. Okay, so basically, what Friar Lawrence is saying is, you know, Romeo, who's raging at himself for being a Montague, is like, why can't I just be a Capulet? Why do I have to have this name? Okay, Friar Lawrence says, why are you being angry at yourself for that when it's something you can't change? It's something you literally cannot control. You cannot make better. It is impossible for you to make better. Why are you so incredibly angry at yourself? Okay, it is worthless because the minute you try to fight against your own birth, heaven and earth, you lose. There's no point. Okay, so he says, why fight the things you can't control? Finally, okay, Friar Lawrence, right, has this massive speech constantly criticizing Romeo. Thy dear love sworn, but hollow perjury, killing that love which thou hast vowed to cherish. Thy wit, that ornament to shapen love, misshapen in the conduct of them both, like powder in a skilless soldier's flask, is set afire by thine own ignorance. He says, furthermore, you are a very, very hypocritical person, because if you claim to love Juliet so much, if you claim to harbor this precious love, how can you just kill yourself? How can you just stab yourself and throw all of that away and put Juliet in so much pain? So basically, Friar Lawrence has this massive dunk on Romeo that really puts him in his place and finally, you know, calms him down where he's willing to listen to reason. Okay? Friar Lawrence at this point basically says, look, calm down, you're going to be fine, you're going to be exiled for a while, but if you beg forgiveness of the prince, if you show him good deeds, you're going to be back in no time. Okay, and Romeo seems to calm down and accept that. Finally, Romeo goes off with the nurse in order to visit Capulet and Juliet. Act 3, Scene 4, at Capulet's mansion. Okay, what happens is Capulet and Paris are arranging, Capulet being the patriarch, Lady Capulet being the matriarch, so the king and queen. Okay, they're arranging for Juliet to be married to this dashing young man called Paris, who we haven't heard from in a while. And basically, they almost decide for her, which is a little bit ironic because at the start of the play, remember, they were like, you know, Juliet has to consent. You know, Juliet has to say yes, otherwise, you know, we'll not marry her to, you know, a particular person. And that's obviously now they're overriding her agency and they're overriding her control over her own life by making that decision for her. So obviously a little bit of a change of pace. We're meant to feel like this is very unjustified. And obviously this brings another twist into it because as we all know, Juliet is already married to Romeo. She's already undergone a marriage. She can't really break that marriage and marry someone else. And she doesn't really have the heart at this point. Knowing that Romeo has killed Tybalt, okay? This makes it even harder for her to tell her family that she's married Romeo, right? Because they're meant to be so hateful against each other because they've, you know, slain each other's families, right? So it actually is quite a, like I said before, and throughout the entire play, contradictory and difficult position for Juliet to be in at the current moment. So Juliet and Romeo meet up. This is right at the very start of Act 3, Scene 5. What happens is, Romeo has to leave now because it's the morning. If he gets spotted again, he'll be killed immediately by the prince, so he has to leave. There's this, very, very teary goodbye between them. Okay, for in a minute there are many days, oh, by this count I shall be much in ears ere I begin again behold my Romeo. So she's really, really sad. She says, can't believe you're going. I hope it's not many, many years. Finally, a terrible bit of foreshadowing, a very horrifying bit of foreshadowing. Oh God, I have an ill-divining soul. Methinks I see now. Thou art so low as one dead in the bottom of a tomb. Either my eyesight fails or thou lookst pale. Okay, she basically says, I suddenly have this, vision of you dying. I suddenly have this vision that you are dying in the bottom of a tomb and you're no longer alive, and you're basically, this deceased person who is pale. Now, obviously, a little bit of foreshadowing. We know what happens at the end of Romeo and Juliet if we're familiar with the tale of Pyramus and Thisbe, which this takes great inspiration from. Cool. What happens? Romeo leaves once and for all. Okay, Juliet says, oh, fortune, fortune, all men call thee fickle. If thou art fickle, what dost thou with him that is renowned for faith? Be fickle, fortune, for then I hope thou wilt not keep him long, but send him back. Okay, so Juliet says fate is a very funny thing because fate constantly changes, it constantly shifts, it makes people, can send people in different directions. And ironically, she hopes fate to be fickle. Because usually people say fate being fickle is a bad thing. Because, you never know what's coming around the corner. Your whole life could be completely destroyed by a series of accidents. But she's actually praying to fate now to be constantly varying. Because she says, well, if fate is fickle, then maybe one day Romeo will finally return to me. How this play ends is in a kind of deception, okay? Stacking on top of the many other deceptions and contradictions and conflicts in the play, which is one of the main themes, as we know already. Okay, what happens? Juliet and Lady Capulet and Capulet, the matriarch, have this massive conflict. Okay, what happens is they want Juliet to marry Paris. She refuses. They have this massive fight, okay, where Capulet has an extreme reaction to the point where he says that I will disown you as a daughter if you do not marry Paris. That is how spiteful I am, okay? When that happens, okay, Juliet is a little bit shocked, okay? And she is extremely pitying of herself. What happens right at the very end, she decides to trick Lady Capulet, at the very least, in trying to convince her that she hates the Montagues and she hates Romeo just as much as ever. She even promises to poison Romeo, okay? So she is completely putting on a fake face. Once again, appearance and reality, completely, literally polar opposite. She said, my husband is on earth, my faith is in heaven. How shall that faith return again to earth unless that husband send it to me from heaven by leaving earth? But that's what she says, right after Lady Capulet leaves, okay? When Lady Capulet is here, she says, I'm going to poison him. I'm going to send him to hell, right? I'm going to do everything I can to punish Romeo for killing, my cousin, okay? That's what happens in line 100, around line 100. But immediately after, only 100 lines later, she basically compares, Romeo to an angel. So at the end of the day, there's a lot of different intersecting lines of conflict in this particular play. And what that results in, or what Shakespeare suggests that results in, is, completely and almost unthinkably horrible tragedy. And that's maybe where he's getting at as we progress to the end of the play. What is the consequence, the unintended, unforeseen consequences of all these conflicts and all this unnecessary violence and fighting? All right, see you next time for Act 4.